All right, it's October 28th, 2024. Noel, wherever you wanted to continue slash pick up, please.
Yeah, sure. So thanks for having me. I'm going to explain about the origins of gravity and electromagnetism and where the inverse square law comes from. So I hope that interests you. That's what everybody's trying to figure out. I'm writing a new paper on it right now. It's not that hard to understand, I don't think. What started me was I studied synergetics, and I remember what somebody named Arthur Young told me. Arthur Young was the only student of Veblen. Veblen was the only teacher of relativity theory at Princeton in 1925. So I meet this old guy, and he's been studying this unified field his whole life. Long story short, he kind of gave me an idea of what I might need to do in order to try and figure that stuff out. And the first thing he said was, first place to start, synergetics. And he explained all about synergetics associations between, for instance, the vector totals at the end, which create the magic numbers for the atomic structures, or the portion where Bucky shows how the closest packed spheres in the vector equilibrium or cube octahedron, where you put 12 around one and then 42 around the 12 and then 92 around the 42, those equal the total AMU of uranium, molybdenum, magnesium, and the hydrogen. So it's really intriguing as this old guy's showing me all this stuff, you know what I mean? So I didn't really study synergetics back when I met him, probably around 21 or something like that. It's probably around 45 when I ran into the book, and when I started reading it, I didn't even remember Arthur at that point. I mean, I remember him if I wanted to because I got his books, but I wasn't remembering the connection really until Bucky started saying things like, we're writing about this may come to be identified as the unified field, right? I'm like going, okay, what's he talking about? Because he's so smart, I just really paid attention to what he's doing. And so I did what Arthur said. Arthur said, we need to examine the higher frequencies, since these lower frequencies are showing us a ratioing metric for the AMUs of these four. They shouldn't just be coincidences. There should be some larger way to assimilate these into the structure of the EMR. So here, let me just open up my screen now. I'm going to share screen here. Now, I think I just click that, right? And then just click share. I'm sure you can help me along if I'm not. Now you're going to look at what my screen is, and I'll pull up some stuff. So this is the first chart that I drew up. You see, can you see my cursor there? So I just all the natural numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. When you add these together, 1 plus 2, you get 3 right here. And that's shown here. When you add 3 more spheres to the edge length, right, your closest packing unit radius energy spheres, you get these 6 shown here. So here are the triangular numbers. Here are the tetrahedral numbers. Okay, so Bucky told me study up at the 137 marker, which is the inverse of the fine structure constant. He said, Feynman was very interested in this number, and he thought we should all kind of pay attention to it. It represents like I said, the speed of light in Hartree units and whatnot. So I studied all the vector totals and volume totals of the different polyhedrons once we were up in this 137 range. Following me? Are you following me, Dan? Hello?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So when I noticed that these vector totals then, I'll drop that down, stop share. So when I looked at all these different totals, I saw that they had numerical interrelationship patterns which were identical to the mega electron voltage of the proton and the electron. I'll share the paper in a second. We'll look over some things on a paper. What I said to myself then, because we learned mathematically that spheres closest pack most economically as a tetrahedron. So I said to myself, this chart I drew up starts with one sphere, and then it expands omnidirectionally as the tetrahedron, and then becomes fractionated at different periodicities or different frequencies, so that it creates all the internally structured polyhedrons also. Does that make sense, kind of, as far as that goes? Let me open this up here. I'm going to open my screen.
Just to kind of echo that back and then ask you to confirm something. So we started with a single sphere, kept adding tetrahedral shells, and you were counting up all these different kinds of relationships.
Yeah, I'll go over it again. Yeah.
Focused at 137 because of the 1 over 137.
Correct. That's just called the inverse of the fine structure constant. Yeah.
And then at the 137th frequency, there are some other emergences that connect to subatomic particles.
Exactly. and I'll open up a, like I said, I'll explain that a little bit more later. I don't know how much of my work you've looked at or whatnot. And so, of course, a person has to have a basic understanding of electron, proton, Planck's constant, this kind of stuff. It's kind of written and meant for the professional in the field. But anyways, you'll see on the screen then has, for instance, the total number of close packed spheres in the cube, and then it goes 114, etc. I do all the vector totals down here. And so I said to myself, if universe is going to closest pack itself like that, let me open up another screen here. And if it's going to fractionate off, see what happened is that the 136 and the 138 frequency measure, you get all kinds of, you get the 9384 MEV and you get 92 naturally regenerative chemical elements. So long story short, I said, so if universe is always just using whole rational units, and if it's fractionating 1/137th amount of its angular momentum when it's creating structure, what would that look like as a mathematical model? And this chart was drawn before I even knew much about nuclear physics at all. So when you 137 times 1 minus 1 and plus 1 gives us 136 and 138. So you're getting whole rational units always fractionating the number 137 as you continue to multiply it by these various numbers. So for instance, 137 times 6 plus 6 is equal to this, and minus 6 is equal to this. There's always a gain or loss of 1/137th at each measure marker. The 137th of the angular momentum remains uncommitted and free. Okay, so that's just something that nuclear physicists discern. So when we get to 137 times 68 plus 68, see, it's a fractionation of light is what I'm kind of seeing. Then when you get to 137 times 69 minus 69, they meet up. Now this meeting point here, called the 0 point, is equal to the proton's rest energy. And I didn't know that until maybe a couple years later, when I had read in Particle Physics by Frank Close on page 39. He says it's still unknown today why the mega electron voltage of the proton is exactly 938.4 mega electron voltage, right? And so I was super amazed because I was like, well, that's the inverse of that's the inverse square of the fine structure constant minus 1 divided by 2. Okay, so then I get all these formulas and they're based on that. So you'll notice here the second meeting point is when you have 137 times 36 plus 136. That's the second 0 point. There's zero difference between the fractionated portions of the positive aspect and the negative aspect. So you've got 137 times 138 minus 138 is 18,768. And 137 times 136 plus 136. So these meeting points are showing us different aspects to the mega electron voltage of the nuclear structure. So 18,768 is equal to 1,836 times 5.11111 times 2. So I started to associate then this fractionation process with negative charge, positive charge. So that's how our charges are kind of developing from the fractionation process, which light's taking at the moment of expansion when it goes, stop sharing, when it goes to the second power of the speed of light. So when that first, theoretically, if everything did expand from one sphere, this shows how it must happen most economically if it did do it most economically or most closest packed. So that's why the number patterns are so revealing as the years go by, and I study these charts and these things, and I study nuclear physics, and I gain more and more number pattern associations. Let me go ahead and open up the paper then that I'm writing.
Let me just try to get a few pieces and see if it's at 137, there's something like a scale jump. Like it's possible that the light pieces, the lighter particles, what looks to be a unity is actually a 137 frequency shape.
Well, maybe not quite. I don't want to twist what my mind is thinking, but I'm glad that you're trying to wrap your mind around it. I hope that after I'm done or whatever, it might make a little bit more sense, because I'm going to refer to Andre McCaud's work, and he's the only person that I've discovered who has any kind of similar type of understanding of this work, okay? So let me go down here for a second, and I'm going to go ahead and jump up to the top in a second. But so this is what Bucky's thinking about. See, right here in matrix calculus, Bucky says,
I'm not seeing anything. Are you trying to share?
Oh yeah, am I not on share screen?
No, reshare. Okay. But yeah, thank you. I mean,
No, that's okay. I need to share screen again. Sorry. Thanks, friend.
All good.
Okay, coolest. Thanks, just keep me on track. There's no worries about any of this stuff. Let's see here. Okay, so origins of gravity. Okay, so see there where it says matrix calculus?
Yep.
Okay, so Fuller learned that electromagnetic scientists had found that all their electromotive force problems could be graphed vectorially. See, he then explored experimentally to discover whether this isotropic vector matrix, as so employed in matrix calculus, played with empty sets of symbols on flat sheets of paper, could be realized in actual modeling. So those are his words. He explains a little bit more about it down here. So what his idea was that in closest packing of unit radius spheres, he thought about how when energy as heat is progressively extracted from systems by cryogenics, the geometries visibly approach equilibrium. As the asymmetric kinetics of energy as heat are removed and absolute zero is neared, the whole field of vectors approaches identical length and identical angular interaction. The lines interconnecting the adjacent spheres' centers constitute a vectorial matrix in which all the lines and angles are identical, which is spoken of by the mathematical physicists as the isotropic vector matrix, where all the energy vectors are identical, that is, in equilibrium, the cosmically absolute zero. He thought, in such a timeless and equilibrious instant, the remainder of the system may be discovered as a vector construction of force interrelationships between centers. A geometry composed of a system of interrelated vectors may be discovered that represents the complete family of potential forces, proclivities, and proportional morphosis by octave introversion and extroversion. I'll explain some of that in a minute. We'll look down here then on Wikipedia, explains a little bit about matrix math, okay? And we'll see from Wikipedia, and you can go there to see the picture, but matrix math is very difficult to use or whatnot. But from Wikipedia, what this is doing is it's using a vector of size 1, okay, to create components which represent a space. So the structuring of these vectors within the Jacobian matrix are the components which represent a space or make a space. Now, an important relation may be made herein by way of understanding that in the following Jacobian matrix, we find that it uses same size vectors of size 1. In synergetics, the same size sphere's diameter of 1 is the same size as the unit vector of edge length size 1, which interconnects, these vectors interconnect the center of volume, mass, and gravity of each of the spheres, right? Now, we can see from the following quote that the vector components represent a space known as the Jacobian matrix, exactly like the vectors of synergetics, which interconnect the closest back unit radius spheres and enclose all space to create the octahedral tetrahedral spaces related to the octet trussing matrix. These tetrahedral and octahedral spaces combine to create all the spaces as they also fill all space most economically or geodesically. Let me open up a picture here. Now here we have a picture of the 6-frequency tetrahedron made with closest packed spheres and spread out so that the vector dynamics are all seen. I'm gonna jump around here, okay? So see this sphere right here? When it travels perpendicular to the next plane, or we could look at this top sphere that you can't see, and when it travels perpendicular through the matrix, perpendicular to this bottom triangular plane, it must move through 3 spaces. See this one space here? The tetrahedral space. See the octahedral space? See the inverted tetrahedral space behind this blue ball? And then boom, that little blue ball. That's the point complex with the 12 vectors extending. That's your vector equilibrium. The 12 surrounding spheres create that cube octahedron. I mentioned these 3 spaces which need to be gone through, transformed through, because they're the same 3 spaces McCod talks about and discovered with his mathematical calculus and the matrix math that they use. Let me jump up to the top here. So in this paper, I'm uniting the fine structure constant of relativity theory, Planck's constant from quantum mechanics, and the gravitational constant G from classical Newtonian mechanics, thereby uniting relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and Newtonian gravitational mechanics using only basic mathematics and basic geometry. So Google just tells us that, the fine structures related to relativity theory by the splitting of the spectral lines. Planck's constant is related to quantum mechanics by the concept of quanta and discrete packets. the gravitational constant, as we know, is related to the determination of, two masses acting upon another. So Einstein wondered why the mass of the proton was almost exactly 1836 times more massive than the mass of the electron. It's 1836.152, but so close. Feynman wondered why the fine structure constant was almost exactly the inverse of the prime number 137. That is, it's 137.035. Xingtung Yao in The Shape of Inner Space explains that once we find the correct cohomology class of the bundle, all the matter particles and force-carrying particles should be fixed. In other words, when we find the correct metric, which is a system of measurement, we'll find that the particles are all fixed. Now, there's an argument associated with the Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen theorem, which suggests that if quantum mechanics is correct, then there must be pre-existing values for all of these matter and force particles. Bell's theorem has been proven many times, and that means there must be pre-existing values. And then we think about pre-time and pre-size values from synergetics, right? So I say when we use the coordinate system universe uses, we're able to find these pre-existing values, as well as to understand the mystery to how they all relate. So in the six-axis metric, I'm going to go ahead and show how this works. Here's Codata's numbers for the gravitational constant, the fine structure constant, and Planck's constant, the speed of light in Hartree units. Here's Codata for electron, proton, neutron, and positron megaelectron values. And mankind's anthropic, that's man-made measuring system, is directly related to the Truthian universe, right? The system, though, is based on seconds, meters, grams, Celsius, etc. This non-anthropic system of synergetics of measurement is used by universe. It's based solely on the total number of energy vectors, gravity tensors, and volumetric domains associated with the six-axis metric. So before time, size, weight, momentum, and temperature have entered into the picture, we can see how coincidentally close the pre-existing values derived from synergetic six-axis metric are to the Codata confirmed values. Notice how just a few basic equations ratio all these constants in whole rational units using only basic math and basic geometry. So these equations unite particle physics fine structure constant A with quantum mechanics Planck's constant H and the classical Newtonian mechanics gravitational G. Where A equals 137 and H equals 6.625, we find the gravitational constant of 6673, and later I'll show you how it's exact at 6674. So we have 1 divided by the fine structure constant to the second power, minus 1 is 18,768. When we divide that by 6.625 minus 1 divided by 2, we get 2.8125, and that gives us 6673, which is the gravitational constant. Now, 1a squared minus 1 is equal to 18,768, which is equal to this number, 1836 electrons of 5.11, plus 1836 electrons. We'll remember the 1 to 1836 ratio. And this is all based on the total number of vectors that are in that tetrahedron that I showed you, which gets to that 137 or 136, 137, 138 frequency measure. See, this tetrahedron, 137 spheres, it has 1868 times 137. If we're going to read this as a map, we can think about how 1836 electrons and 1836 positrons just got created, and they're all traveling at the speed of light in Hartree units, 137. Does that kind of make sense so far? Sorry if it doesn't. Are you still with me, Daniel?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the number of local connections in a 137 frequency tet is a nexus from which also there are simple relations with a lot of other important values.
Yeah, and then in my other papers, I got 700-page thesis, so it's not like, I'm trying to give every number from every whatever here. But yeah, it's really interesting to notice how they all do interassociate so interestingly, like meticulously. Well, I'm not sure if you're seeing me or not right now. But anyways, here, let me share.
Another piece that really struck me is about our CGS system, the centimeters, grams, seconds, all of these discrete or quantized type measurements that are predicated around the cube. One centimeter cubed to the that's 1 calorie. So all the SI units and the way that they're linked, and how that is a 3D coordination measuring instrument, as all measures have to have their metric. And then in contrast, there's this nature's accounting system. What actually matters for the baseball doing that parabola is its mass and its attraction to things nearby and all these other features of the real world, which aren't just the values in this SI space.
Computer's glitching a little bit. It was going slower early on me, and now my computer screen's frozen. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, maybe the thing will start giving us movement on the picture again.
But yeah,
I'm
the
going to
audio.
share screen again then.
Yeah.
Well, is your video messed up? Because mine's messed up.
I can
Okay,
see you
now
again.
it's
You were
moving
frozen.
again.
Yeah, yeah, it's all good now. So I think share and continue. But yeah,
Okay, so yeah, let me jump back in here. Let me share my screen here again. Jink. So basically what's happening, without me kind of reading all through it now, since you kind of understand, is based on the vector totals. Bucky thought he could discover an isotopic vector matrix, or he did discover an isotopic vector matrix, and he thought that this did represent the matrix calculus from a different kind of perspective, a perspective of structure. The other two scales that this whole work is based on, then the second scale is based on the 918 frequency tetrahedron, and it has this many total number of vectors, 1836 times 1838 times 92. And you might recall then that there are 92 naturally regenerative chemical elements. The 1 to 1836 electron proton ratio and 1 to 1838 is very close. Remember, this is all pre-time, pre-size. So once time, momentum, and energy starts entering into the picture, in my mind, I see how the vibrations of all this heat, momentum in real life aberrates these numbers slightly. Like, for instance, 1838.5 is not the 1 to 1838.683 ratio of the neutron, but it's really close. And so when we see these ratios, 1 to 1838.5 compared to 1 to 1838.683, the minuscule amount of difference leads me to think that this really is something that is worth looking at. So basically then when you take the scales, total number of vectors, right? 6760164, and you divide those by Planck's constant minus 1 times 2, I think that's 6 or whatever, which equals 360 degrees. I'll go over that in a little bit. You get the inverse square of the fine structure constant, right? That's c squared in Hartree units. So this number here, 137.03, is the second, to the second power, is the second power of light speed in Hartree units. And that shows how light speed as a second power, right, became embedded within atomic mass when EMR began to hyperexpand at the beginning of universal expansion at its second power rate, or at c squared. Well, notice then that this number right here, which is basic math, 667 divided by 360 gives us the inverse square of the fine structure constant. As revealed by synergetics, we get the exact proton and neutron mega electron voltages. So see, there's just too many coincidences within this whole metric I discovered to think that it's all just a coincidence. So the process EMR goes through as it converts itself into structured mass with permanent charge is a process that creates gravity and electromagnetism, as well as the process which sets their inverse square law related ratios. 1 divided by radius to the second power is directly related to 1 divided by the fine structure, or the inverse of the fine structure constant to the second power minus 1. So here's how the other three scales ratio. So we have the frequency measure divided by angular momentum measure gives us the 6673. The third scale, so the second scale gives us the same 6673. The third scale gives us 6676, but what's interesting about that is when we average them, we get 667427, which is extremely close to 66743 of CODATA's gravitational constant. Does that make sense, kind of? So what we're thinking here then is that, and I might as well say so. So here I have reason to believe that the three scales derived from synergetics are directly related to three gauge coupling constants, which are sought for within the string theories field. As these three scales continue to double, they'll always maintain these ratios to Planck's constant as it continues to double and the gravitational constant as constant. We can see how the synergetic vectorial geometry and its symmetrical polynomial equations, which are related to the symmetrical polyhedral structures, therefore can unify relativity theory, quantum mechanics, and classical Newtonian mechanics using only basic math and basic geometry. We see here then, this is our basic equation. 1 divided by a squared minus 1 divided by h minus 1 divided by 2 equals g. So in Andre McCaugh's work, Introduction to Synchronized Kinematics and Electromagnetic Mechanics, in Chapter 3.1 in Figure 4, he shows a rendition of the photon beam uncoupling itself into its electron and positron pair. Let me just jump out of this so we can chat a little bit, because I know it's kind of boring. So you asked about like when light was fraying. I don't know what might be fraying off of it, but Andre discovered that in accord with de Broglie's double particle photon theorem, we've had experiential evidence within our scientific community over the last 150 years or whatever, 200 years that we've been studying all this stuff, that the photon beam at 1.022 megaelectron volts does have the potential to fractionate itself into two real particles, the electron and the positron. I should open up a picture of his paper.
Is that a lot of energy? How much energy is that?
Give me a second. 0.511 megaelectron volts for the electron and then for the positron. So the electron and the positron, I know it's here somewhere.
That's kind of like nuclear fission, but of course not for the nucleus.
Yeah, it's like electromagnetic radiation fission. It's a breaking apart of the electromagnetic radiation wave. Wow. I closed it because my computer was going real slow. Well, anyways, anybody who's interested, go look at his papers listed there, yada, yada, right? But it's cool because it just shows the picture basically and explains how the photon beam of that specific mega electron voltage range, which is a frequency and a Hertzian frequency and a wavelength association also that he talks about. You know, he gives all the numbers. He's real smart. He knows all that regular math from, you know, nuclear physics and stuff. And of course, I'm just kind of learning it through his work because, well, like I said, when I discovered all these number patterns, I decided I better learn, you know, whether there's a significant relation or not. And in the decision to study all this stuff, I'm just starting to learn enough that, well, I think I'm actually starting to make sense and understand what I'm talking about. So his work shows that the electron and the positron are decoupling. Let me read some more because I wrote a little bit more about it and it kind of makes
just one quick question.
Yeah, you go ahead.
What are the three major scales? Could you restate what are these three grand overarching scales that the special frequency tests relate to?
Yeah.
What are those three scales?
Let me go and open that other scale here. Hang on. Okay, let me open this other chart. They're just based on prime number patterns. See, I started all this when I broke up all this. I'm going to open up a couple of things. Am I sharing screen right now?
Not yet.
Okay. Let me open this thing up here. That's going to take a second. My computer's been going super slow and glitchy. I don't know why.
What kind of computers would a broader energetic understanding unlock?
I'm sorry, what?
What kind of computers do you think that a broader, more applicable understanding of synergetics would unlock?
Oh no, my mind's focusing right now, so I'm sorry. I'm not gonna try to.
I know, just throwing it out.
Okay. No, let me keep going. Here, so I'm sharing screen now. Now it's all black. Oh, my computer's really glitching. Okay, well, let me just see if I keep going
The screen share looks good now.
Okay, let's see if this thing will open up. Decoding failed. Let me see what that does. No, that's not going to work. Oh, it did. Okay, cool. Okay, so let me open another one because it's kind of important. I know you want to follow this. So, okay, remember the first chart that I showed you? It gives all of the total numbers of the tetrahedrons, numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, and then the triangular numbers 1, 3, 6, 10, etc. I just showed that to you a few seconds ago. Okay, so here's a chart which shows how all of those totals then are broken into their prime factors for all the different volumes. Go down here. Okay, so see how the prime numbers are used in a patterned way? When you break up all the prime factor, all the total number of vectors in the tetrahedron, for instance, right here, it breaks up into these prime factors. First, there's 6 vectors, then there's 24, then there's 60, and then it keeps going like that. You'll notice that the prime numbers are always used in a patterned way. So when I noticed that the 17 and the 23 were revolving around, not so far. So I noticed that 23 to the third power, 23 to the third power, 23. Now 23 times 4 is equal to 92. So we have 92 naturally regenerative chemical elements showing a association here. And on this side here is where we have all those vector totals with the 1836 times, well, excuse me, the 938.4 of the mega electron voltage. So I said, if light's splitting itself off by fractionating itself by 1/137th and getting 136, and all these mega electron voltage readings, and if it's fractionating itself off on this way, and it's getting all the 92 readings, then that's when I made that first chart. Oops, what's this one? Just complete glitch and silly thing. Come on. Okay, so I just tried to close that, didn't I? Sorry, my computer never really did this before. We'll just be patient with it. Who cares? Whatever. Okay, I'm closing that so it doesn't try and open again. Close that, stop. Okay, here's what I was trying to go. So when I did that with the 137 number, I noticed that the 17 and the 23, see here, the 17 and the 23, were the prime factors of that fractionation process. So then I decided, does the 17 and the 23 fractionate around any other number like that? And it fractionates the 99. It fractionates around the 919 the same way. So we do that same process. Now, I don't want to go into how I discovered the 3677 other than this. The 613 is the total number of spheres in the 17 frequency cube layers. The 919 is the total number of spheres in the 17 frequency hexagons, closest packed spheres. So I deduced that, and then I said, I wonder if those revolve around another number, and they revolve around 3677. So this is how I decided, or how I discerned the data points. So the 0 point for this number is 6760164. Now, what's interesting about these things is that this number here multiplied by this number here, 3677, times 2 is equal to the total number of vectors in the tetrahedron with 3,677 spheres to its edge length. The tetrahedron with 919 spheres to its edge length has exactly 422,280 times 1838 total number of vectors. So remember, this is about a vector construction which might be able to model all the associated behaviors. Are you still there? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Okay.
cool. Well, okay, I took off share screen and now I'm not seeing you. But anyway, see if you can hear me. I'll just kind of
Oh
keep
yeah.
it
I see you. I see myself and you. I'll
interesting. It's
restart.
like my computer's kind of, I just got a little cheapy one. I don't know. It's just a Chromebook or something.
That's all it takes.
So that's kind of how it all came about. Now, let me go ahead and let me reload that. This is the lecture then, or my next paper. I should have it done in a couple of weeks. Let's do up to 150 so I can see. Okay, so we discussed a little bit
Not
about
sharing. Not sharing yet.
Oh, I'm not sharing it. Okay, thanks for telling me. Dink. Oh, okay, share. Share. Okay, that should be doing it.
Yep.
Open my paper again. So we went over how the different constants here, gravitational and fine structure and Planck, are related to these different megaelectron voltages, right? And how they all can act as one unified equation, unifying fine structure constant with relativity theory and Planck's constant with quantum mechanics with Newtonian mechanics of gravity. And as I say, I'm just a number theorist. Do you know what I mean? When this all started out, so I'm just doing my best to try and learn about all this stuff. So this is what Andre talks about. So when two photons of 1.022 megaelectron volts interact, they may uncouple into two positrons and two electrons, because each one decouples into its own electron and positron. Now, these may then combine by having the two positrons and one of the electrons increase their frequency as they decrease their wavelength and get smaller, more charged, to become the two up quarks and one down quark of the proton, while the remaining electron may then be caught up by this proton's opposite positive charge and remain in orbit within its least action electromagnetic equilibrium state, thereby becoming the first hydrogen atom. So my frequencies are not based on hertz, they're based on pre-time, pre-size. So I'm hoping that if when we experiment and we find that we can blow up two 1.022 megaelectron volt electron beams, and they do create the particles, that we can then use this 1.002 MeV to relate to my 0 points that I've hypothesized. This then will be able to translate my non-Hertzian related frequency from synergetics into the megaelectron voltage to thereby discern the 0 points related to the other two scales. I hope that makes sense. If not, I'm trying to write about it. So astronomers have discovered that on Uranus, the water is frozen into what's called superionic ice. In this ice, the hydrogen atoms have detached from the oxygen and they exist inside the oxygen atoms, which now form a lattice within which the hydrogen acts as a superconductor of electricity. This helps us understand when the first hydrogen atoms were created, they acted like conductors of electricity. And this therefore helps us to understand how gravity and electromagnetism first developed, as well as to where they came from. They came from the pure electromagnetic energy substance, which is the only real metaphysical, physical energy matter substance in universe. Now, we talked about matrix calculus a little bit, so I'm going to go ahead and jump over here to and Mead says something cool too. He's Carver Mead wrote a book, Engineering View of Gravity. He encourages us to find our own way. He says, there's no ultimate theory of everything. The exciting finds seldom come along the beaten track. There's far more to be discovered than has already been discovered. Develop your own intuition about how nature works. Mathematics is for making concepts precise and quantitative, but you must have the concept first. So we're following the concepts of Bucky. This equation here from Andre's unifying all classical force equations, right, explains the derivation of Kepler's third law, where it shows a third power radius of the system ratioing to a second power rate of time or frequency progressions. I'm not going to go over this really much anymore. I'm just showing this formula here. Gravity is equal to, see this angular momentum? That is 2 times the formula for the amount of volume in a torus. I'm mentioning this because I'm going to go down now. Synergetics teaches us that there's only 2 possible covariables operative in all designing universe. They are modifications of angle and frequency. Okay, let's keep that in mind. Remember, time is related to frequency in synergetics, and mass is related to frequency also. This here we can notice as, for instance, 2 pi r. Sorry if I'm moving. I thought I mentioned it more. Let me go back up to the equation. Thank you for. So 2 pi r we know is related to the amount of distance about the circumference of a circle. So that relates to 360 degrees of angular momentum. I'm going to jump back up to show how now in this formula here we have a frequency setting, and here we have the angular momentum. So when you're measuring and dividing angular momentum by frequency, we're getting that gravitational constant. You'll notice that when we use h minus 1 divided by 2, or 6.625 minus 1 divided by 2, we get the number 2.8125. When we continue to double this number, we'll notice that we get the angular momentum covariables related to 360 degrees, one full circle. So there seems to be a translational metric within synergetics, which is then enabling us to translate Planck's constant into angular momentum covariables. These same numbers are also then going to be related to, for instance, the amount of angular orientation in, for instance, a square has 4 angles of 90 degrees each. An octagon has 8 angles of 45 degrees each. So we'll notice that the number patterns associated then with the continuous scaling of Planck's constant are associated with the total number of edge lengths and angles in the different polygons as we continue to double the number of edges and angles in the polygons, starting with 4 and then 8, 16, 32. I hope that makes sense. Now, when we go the other direction, we see 720 degrees, the amount of angular orientation with one tetrahedron. 1440 degrees is associated with the octahedron. When these continue to double, we continue to get 4 points, 8 points, 16 points, etc. on the surface of the sphere. As these points continue to double upon the surface of the circle or the surface of the sphere, they continue to ratio h minus 1 divided by n to the second power or multiplied by n to the second power. So these continuing doublings of angular momentum covariables and their associated total number of equidistantly demarcated points upon the surface of the circle or the sphere are rationally coordinated with the volumetric ratios related to the following polyhedrons. So what's so cool about this synergetic stuff is now we'll notice that we have these different volume ratios for the cube, the vector equilibrium, the rhombic dodecahedron, and the tetrachedecahedron. When we divide these in their different various ways, the numbers also become associated with 2.8125 or h minus 1 divided by 2. Notice the same number patterns. So when we ratio these continuous doublings of angular momentum and pressure volume ratios related to Planck's constant with the continuous doublings of the frequency ranges of the alpha scale, we obtain continuous ratios with the gravitational constant G. These considerations help us to understand how pressure and force became contained in form. As can be seen, the angular momentum covariables related to Planck's constant are identical to those related to the volumetric ratios between the various polyhedrons. This helps us to understand that the angular momentum forces related to polyhedral structures are directly related to the volumetric pressure ratios related to polyhedral structures. So once again, there's only 2 possible covariables operative in all designing universe. They're modifications of angle and frequency. So when we use the 0 points of the alpha scale and Planck's revised constant, notice the 90, the 45, etc. These continue to double, and we continue to get 6673, which is a gravitational constant. Let's talk for laymen right now. So if gravity and the strong nuclear force and electromagnetism and everything's derived from the electromagnetic force, how come gravity doesn't have any observable repulsive force? It's the same reason magnets have no observable repulsive force when left to their natural tendencies. Magnets, when left to their natural tendencies, always precess at 90 degrees of angular reorientation when the repulsive same-sign charges interact, and thereby always revert their angular orientation into a setting which promotes the attractive aspect of the force to become the dominant and overwhelmingly significant aspect of these considerations. We can do some experiments to demonstrate this precession of 90 degrees from the repulsive aspect of the electromagnetic force, reorienting itself to the attractive. If we place a bar magnet in the center of a table and then use another bar magnet to try and push the other magnet off the table, we'll notice that when we bring the same charged poles together, the magnet on the table will inadvertently spin one halfway around, or 180 degrees. So it half spins until it realigns itself with the opposite sign poles and thereby becomes attracted to each other. If we took a shoebox and started dropping magnetic buckyballs into it, as the magnets all fall into the box, they'll inadvertently bounce and spin precess 180 degrees until they all become attracted to one another and interconnect into a bunch. Not one of the magnets will repulse itself away from the other magnets because of this basic concept of precession. Experiment 3. Take magnetic buckyballs and wrap 6 around one for a hexagon of 7. Push the central sphere gently so it very slightly extends outward from the hexagonal plane and set this protruded side down on the table so it can spin freely on this pivot point. If we take a few different sets of these hexagons and put them together approximately 3 inches from one another, either linearly or in a hexagonal shape, we'll notice that whenever we spin only one of the hexagonal sets, all the rest will spin also. If we move another magnet by any of these 7 sets of hexagonal magnets, they will all begin to spin as soon as the first set is acted upon. We may even take an unmagnetized piece of ferromagnetic material like a nail and move this closely by any of the other sets and thereby cause this set to spin along with the others. This reminds us that magnets are attracted to nails and other magnetizable metals in the same way that the nails are attracted to the magnets. Magnets exhibit both repulsive and attractive qualities depending on whether or not they are being aligned with the same sign poles being oriented towards one another, which repulse the two magnets away, or opposite signs oriented towards one another, which attracts them. Why doesn't one end of a magnet attract a nail and the other end repulse the same nail? See, if the magnet were to always exhibit a repulsive force from one end and an attractive force from the other, we'd think it logical to assume that the magnet would do just this, repulse the nail with one end and attract the nail with the other. The reason it doesn't is because of the way the unpaired electrons in the unpolarized ferromagnetic material, like the nail, react once it has had its polarity set. This enables all of its individual electron spin angular momentum vectors to reorient themselves into a quantized unidirectional magnetic force and add up all their individual magnetic forces to become temporarily magnetized, regardless of which end of the already polarized magnet to which the nail is being attracted. So either end of the magnet simply reorients the unpaired electrons in the nail, thereby enabling the nail to temporarily become itself magnetized. These experiments help us to understand how the resultant of precession occurs in relation to the many different bodies acting in concert or tandem with one another. These movements all represent what we might think about as the least action electromagnetic equilibrium state, or best fit, for all the electromagnetically charged parts of this spinning system as they all interrelate to one another. These behaviors help us to understand how the electromagnetically charged quarks act, as they all are set to spin as primary components of structure within the domain frame of large protons and neutrons. So we can think about this also in the always attractive aspect of the electromagnetic force, which is a resultant of precession, is also prevalent in the tendencies which lint and dust experience when acted upon by the electromagnetic force related to what we call static electricity. Why doesn't the electromagnetic force which governs static electricity ever exhibit a repulsive force by way of always causing the lint and dust to be repulsed away from other stuff? Wouldn't it be nice if just half of the time the repulsive force could become dominant when we put on a shirt which is heavy with static electricity and it clings to our skin? Our shirt would then puff outwards and not touch our skin at all. We would have puffy shirts. Same thing as the electromagnetic force ever had that truly exhibited always and everywhere repulsive force. The TV would never get dust or lint on it. But lo and behold, gravity and electromagnetic force always and only exhibit their attractive tendencies when left to their natural rest state, because all electromagnetic currents locked inside of nuclear structure are always precessing their angular momentum covariables in such a way that all repulsive aspects of spin, related to the particle large or small, into the properly oriented direction to allow the attractive property to become the dominant aspect. Now, the reason the moon doesn't fall into the earth and the earth doesn't fall into the sun is because of the speed of the smaller masses are at their critical speed and their critical distance away from the more massive object. So this enables a harmonic balance between the attractive force related to all the charged parts of the system and their tendency to want to propel themselves away from the system's center of gravity by way of its inherent speed. The harmonious association between the time, rate, speed, and distance of the two sized masses enables them to remain in a state of critical proximity balance for very long periods of time. So I'll jump out of this so we kind of just, if you have a question. And I don't know if this is stuck to 1 hour for certain and you need to go, but if you want
Oh,
to keep.
let's keep going.
Yeah, okay, good. Well, we
okay.
got about 10 more minutes. I'll explain a couple more cool stuff. I can't see you, but if you can see me, we chat for a minute. Any questions? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, do you want to go through the rest of what you want to go through, or do you want me to ask the questions?
Oh, no, I'm okay. I just didn't know if you had any. I'm just ready to
Okay.
keep going.
Yeah, so one piece I saw there was about coming back to the three scales, that experimental validation at the specific 1.022 is available in this first shell, and that could be used to extrapolate to these higher frequency settings,
Yeah.
would address broader
Like
questions.
a Rosetta Stone of translation, now that we know that there might be a real translational association between synergetics frequency and the frequency of Hertz. Let me explain real quick, because people get confused when they read synergetics and he's talking about frequency in relation to the tetrahedron and the edge length and its size. When we start with the molecules, they add molecule to molecule to molecule and they get bigger and bigger. The frequency of the interassociated total number of agglomerations then at the molecular scale is related to then this same modelable tetrahedral scale, where everything's getting bigger by way of 1 inch, 2 inch, 1 mile. When we're thinking just about, I'm going to go ahead and share screen again.
But just on that one point, it's like the same accretive and attractive mechanics that would be associated with close packing of spheres in baseball scale, classical mechanics. Those packings mediated through this shared coordinate reference system of the IVM, those help us understand nuclear packing. And you're
Yeah,
also expanding this to include higher frequency
just pure,
outcomes.
just pure EMR. So when we think about closest pack real spheres like baseballs, and they create different sizes, even if these baseballs are the size of just atoms, when they intercombine to create the molecules, we know they get bigger and bigger because we live on a bigger and bigger person in Earth. We got these big structures. But what's not understood was people, because he explains that pretty well. Look, the frequencies get bigger, the polyhedrons get bigger. But what people are confusing is that the electromagnetic radiation is not getting bigger, it is getting more compact. Am I sharing screen now?
Yeah,
Origins of gravity.
radiation and gravity, not just baseball, not just oranges at the supermarket, but radiation and gravity and their associated laws and inverse laws.
Exactly. Let me see if I had about 8 papers open up, and then I'll start going slow. So I closed a bunch because I thought that might help my computer to work a little bit faster. Analyzing. Okay, so in this paper where I analyzed Henri Macaude's demystifying the Lorentz force equation, I I took this little graph here, right, from synergetics. So this picture, you seen the square picture with the little squares inside of it? Daniel, are you there with me?
Yep.
Oh, you see the picture? Okay. So let's just think about then, and I explained it down a little bit here. So an easy way for the layman to understand the principle of angular momentum is to imagine being in a car and turning a corner at a specific speed. So let's pretend we're on this and it's a map to grandma's house, right? We can either go all the way here and just turn one time and then we make it to grandma's house. Or we could go a shorter route. We could go here, turn here, maybe turn here and end up there. Or we could go here and go here and go here and go here and go here, here. Now, although these
seem like they're shorter routes, it's the exact same length if you were to measure it. So all you're doing when you take the shorter route is you're creating more angular variance. I got to turn it a second time. Now I got to turn a third time. Okay. So this is how electromagnetic radiation can go the same distance or the same speed, c, in vacuum, but they have different frequencies with different wavelengths. We'll call this one frequency. How frequently turn? Just one time. We'll call this two frequency. One turn, two turns.
Just
How
a quick
frequently?
note on this. This is like
Yeah.
we have analog measurements for the what we consider a continuous spectra of bands. This is providing a discretized underlying connection.
Model. Yeah, a
that
model
actually
because it's an EMR model. And so you see that when the frequency increases, the wavelength, when the frequency doubles, the wavelength halves. There's never really been a modelable association this in physics. We double the frequency of how many times we got to turn, and we've halved the wave length. See how this wavelength goes all the way from here to here, and this wavelength goes from here to here, and this one is only half. So let's think about then, an easy way for the layman to understand the principles of angular momentum is to imagine being in a car and turning a corner at a specific speed. Depending on how fast you're going and how sharp the turn is, will determine how much force you feel as a result. Now, force is related to pressure, and that's why you're going to feel yourself pressing against the door or the other person next to you in the car. Now, imagine you're in a car traveling from A to C on that map. If you went from A to B to C, you would only make one turn. If you took one of the seemingly straighter and seemingly more direct routes, you'll go the exact same distance, but you'll have to make twice the number of turns each smaller, zigzagging square path you take. Each turn will represent more force on you as you make twice as many turns or angular arcs to make your way from A to C. The frequency of the number of times you'll need to turn will double each halving of the wavelength route taken. So this is how and why all the different frequencies along the EMR range may travel at the speed of light c in vacuum, representing the same length of linear momentum at c, even though they may be a higher frequency with a shorter wavelength and thereby hold or store more energy or force. So when in the car, the sharper the turn, the more angular momentum or force being activated on your body by the inertia, right? Now, if you're a figure skater and you pull your arms inwards when you're spinning, by tensing them, you produce more centripetal force as the mass of your arms comes inwards and holds and stores that amount of energy or force as angular acceleration due to the increase in angular momentum. So the more times you have to turn, the more angular momentum you have and the more force that's being created within that associative principle. Let me open this other paper that I'm working on.
Yeah, just to restate that part, it's that photons of different, radio wavelengths or different visible spectra, they have the same mass and the same speed.
No, they have no mass.
Energy.
They have no mass, but it's okay. Yeah, different energies when translated upon their intercombination with either molecular mass or other EMR mass in associated with Planck's constant. So you get the energy is equal to the frequency multiplied by that constant Planck. Yeah, that's right. It just doesn't hold individual mass or charge as a photon beam. I didn't want to mistake anybody.
Okay.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Okay.
So let me go then. So I make an analogy from that to this racetrack. So if you're on a racetrack with a car, right? We'll see that doubling the force with having the chordal circumference and the radial radius wavelength, it doubles the frequency and once again the force. So if you're in a car at 60 miles per hour around a circular track and it has a 1 mile circumference, you'll complete one cycle in 1 minute. If your car had an onboard gravitational force monitor, you'd be able to measure the force of gravity in the car's relationship to the angular momentum you're creating by turning the car. This arc of curvature is what makes us feel more force as we turn around a corner in a car. The angle of the arc of curvature is what creates the force. The more you turn the car, the more angular momentum and force you experience upon yourself as the car turns a corner. Now, if we half the radius of the circumference of this track to 1/2 mile, but maintain the same speed, we will go around the track 2 times every minute. We will have doubled the frequency of our cyclic rotations by doubling the number of times we go around the track within the same time period. It's in this way that we will double the amount of force as we continue turning the corner sharper at each next halving of the circumference of the circle. If we had an onboard g-force monitor, we would notice that the force of gravity did just double in relation to the angular momentum covariable of the radius, which has just halved. Half the circle and we double the amount of force as angular momentum, as well as doubling the frequency. Now, if we could theoretically, well, it goes ahead. So this doubling of frequency every halving of the wavelength of the radius of the cycle upon the circular track doubles the force that you will feel on your body inside of the car, as well as doubling the g-forces measured on the onboard monitor. Doubling the frequency doubles the force while having the wavelengths. So notice the frequency and the number of times the car cycles around the track increases, it doubles, but the time stays the same. So this is what's happening within the cesium atoms inside of the atomic clocks when the time element seems to be increasing. It's only the frequency that's increasing in accord with the distance from the Earth into the atomic clocks. As the distance increases, these charged quarks to all increase their frequency and get closer. Just like when the figure skater increased her frequency by spinning faster, more times per second, as if she had two friends out on the ice rink spinning with her, they wouldn't be able to get too close to each other if they were spinning. They'll have their hands all the way out. They would touch each other. But once they wrapped their arms in and spun faster, they would have smaller wavelengths or angles associated with their radius, so they could all get much closer. This is the same way the three figure skaters can spin closer together if they pull their arms into their bodies and thereby increase their angular momentum and the frequency of their spin, while at the same time contracting their radial length. Length contraction is a real physical phenomena as the quarks all get closer to one another. Time dilation was erroneously assumed to be the same as frequency dilation, which is related solely to the real physical charged quark components of the pure electromagnetic energy substance, which all atomic structure is based on. The frequency of the quarks increases, but not the time. So let's imagine then that those figure skaters were shooting out one little photon every time they completed a spin. After they took their arms in and spin faster and got closer to each other, they would be shooting off photons more quickly. Can you hear me? Still with me?
Yeah.
Dan? Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so I'm not seeing you from an image. Are you seeing me?
Yep, still see you.
Cool, who cares? Okay, as long as that's what we're recording, I'm happy. Well, that's about the long and short of it. I think that, I'll write my paper and share it with you and others and yada, yada. Questions, though, yeah, what do you think? Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah, I have a lot of questions. What's most important for you in how you're continuing, and where do you want to what vista do you aim for with all of this research and development?
Yeah, cool. I'm just, it's just a hobby. I'm plugging along, you know what I mean? See how it all ends. But I'm 99% certain that I know what I'm talking about, and that this is the unified field, and that these are the unified field equations, etc. Blah blah blah. Here, let me open up this paper again. Let me share screen first, since I can't see you anyways. So we'll remember then that. So see these symmetrical equations, right? These are the equations related to the total number of closest back unit radius spheres or tensors, their kissing points or vectors, and the total tetrahedral volume inside of each of these different polyhedrons. These are all symmetrical polyhedrons, which are the exact same shape each time you layer them. They keep on creating tetrahedral, octahedral, or vectorhedral shapes. So these symmetrical synergetic equations, right? I'll just read this in. So we will recall that these number patterns which exist within the isotropic vector matrix are not based on grams, centimeters, joules, seconds, newtons, MEV, c squared, or any other man-made system of mensuration. And so this offers us a non-anthropic means for understanding how the metric which universe used to create all these different interrelated number pattern associations developed, as well as to understand how certain fundamental laws of physics, such as the inverse square law related to gravity and electromagnetism, developed. This pre-time precise metric sets the pre-existing values for Planck's constant, the fine structure constant, the gravitational constant, and the masses and MeV_c squared of the electron, positron, proton, and neutron in whole rational units using only basic mathematics and basic geometry, thereby providing mankind with a unified field for energetic and geometric referencing. So, I don't know if mankind's ever going to learn how to utilize these in, any other interesting ways, but what I'm hoping is that we can just do what McCod and I have been talking about. Many years before I met McCod, back in 2018, I put all those YouTube videos on, and in the end ones, I explain how we should be able to smash high energy photons together in order to create electrons and positrons. On that note, the Brookhaven National Institute's Relativistic Collider did, in 2021, smash together two ions from gold atoms, and they smashed these ions together and created electrons and positrons. And therefore, we're getting close to then. I think that satisfied what's called the Gregory Bright, James Wheeler hypothesis, where they had hypothesized that if we smash high energy photons together, we should be able to get electrons and positrons from it. I think this must have I didn't study it, but I assume then that they were probably aware then of de Broglie's double particle hypothesis, which then, of course, basically states the same thing, which is that there are two particles inside of these photon beams, and at certain megaelectron voltage and frequency ranges, they are capable of being split apart, either when they graze other atomic nuclei, such as in the corona of the sun, which is what McCod talks about in his The Corona Effect and his other paper, Inside Planets and Star Masses. And so, yeah, it's interesting that the scientifically experimented stuff from like Relativistic Collider and Brookhaven National Institute is kind of starting to confirm our theories. I think that institute's Relativistic Collider is going to begin smashing stuff together at smaller MEV ranges. And I think Andre might have already contacted them to let them know we should try and smash things in the 1.022 mega electron voltage range. Then it'll just be about creating new types of colliders where we'd have like a bubble chamber with nothing in it except a vacuum at 0 Kelvin, where we can interharmonize these frequencies. And it should happen that when we smash these frequencies together at the correct frequencies, we should be able to create not just electrons and positrons, but their combinations once again as the quarks, the protons, the neutrons. And therefore, then we should be able to use pure electromagnetic radiation to create hydrogen, helium, oxygen, all the different chemical elements without all of the necessarily hypothesized things we might need to do today. Well,
let me just try to restate that. So, by looking at how let me just try to get this.
No worries.
How the subcomponents of photons and also the same sort of scale-free patterns, multi-scale patterns, the accretive nature of everything becomes on a new type of discretized but integrated continuum in a unified field. And then that opens up, just to skip over a bunch of things, to the possibility of the wave collider, whereas the particle collider has massive particles colliding, and yet the possibility of a wave collider is the analogy, and that is all part and parcel of the integrated nature of mass energy. Sometimes it seems more energetic, sometimes it seems more mass-like, and yet we know that there's interconversions, and they're all related through these whole integer common accounting synergetic patterns.
Yeah, I mean, that really does kind of sum it up. So with this new metric, we see once again that the different constants are all whole rational unit phasings related to the fractionation of the tetrahedron system. Notice here that we have, you saw my paper on quaternions and whatnot, right? So these take the place of the Hamiltonian quaternions by taking place of the imaginary components I, J, and K, where we replace these with frequency. Well, you might not have been part of the conversation, but one of our computer programming experts explained to us that the I, J, and K are used as rotations, and they input these into their computer, and the I, J, and K then enable them to rotate images on a screen or robot parts on robots, for instance. Now we'll know that when we then take the I, J, and K, which are used as rotations, and we replace these with frequency, which is rotations within the EMR field, cyclic rotations, right, based on periodicity, we see that this quaternion equations, and then the quadrinomial, the trinomial, etc. equations are all symmetrical when associated with this symmetrical metric. And so, I mean, we're really at the brink of some new kind of understanding for modelable physics. And it is all pretty exciting. These equations here, I like to think about how, it's too much. I was going to talk about string theory stuff or whatever, but no, that's cool. Just these equations and these charts that I showed you, these will be on the wall of every high school mathematics class all around the world, who knows when. But you'll recall maybe when you were in elementary school, they had a number chart, and the number chart was up on the side of the wall. And the number chart enabled children easier way to, let me get rid of this, count. So the children were able to look up at the board, and after they'd learned how to count to 10 or 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 on their fingers, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 on their fingers, they could look up at that board and they could continue learning their counting. When I was teaching children to count when I was in the first grade, yes, because the teachers saw that I could do it proficiently and they didn't know how to teach the children how to count. So I told the child who didn't know how to, he could count to 20, but he couldn't add or subtract, and the teacher couldn't figure out how to teach him. There were 3 teacher's aides. It was kind of a fun experience. So I pointed up to the number board. I said, see all those numbers up there, how they go to 100? And he says, yeah. How high can you count? He says, I can count to 20 proudly. I says, you're not going to have any problem adding or subtracting at all. Now, you see how you got 5 fingers? And you see I got 5 fingers on the other one? Let's just pretend that you start with 4. Go ahead and count up 4. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4. Now just count up 3 more. 1, 2, 3. And of course, he ended up on the other hand. And then I said, now count all of them. And he goes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And I said, so 4 plus 3 is equal to 7. And you can see a little light dawning. I says, okay, so do it again. So now do 3. He counts up 3 on his fingers. And I say, now add 3 more. 1, 2, 3. Now count up all those fingers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And he says, oh, I get it. So we did a few more of those practice. And then I told him, now let's start with 10. Now let's subtract 2. 1, 2. 10 minus 2 is 8. And so he's like, oh, now I get it. So it's kind of cool because when the teacher came back, he was proficiently adding and subtracting numbers, to which she exclaimed, how did you do it? So I explained to her, and this is why we must understand that today's core math is a ridiculous joke, intentionally intended to dumb down our society so that they don't know how to understand, for instance, the laws and the politics and all these things they're supposed to be voting on as aware and informed citizens. It's kind of what happened with the Roman days when we made it against the law to use Arabic numerals, which is what these are. And you would be put under death if you didn't use Roman numerals. This stopped everybody except the clergy and the learned to be able to calculate high numbers. This probably prevented the layman from understanding just how many sacks of wheat he was being taxed. So my point being then, Dan, long story short, is this is the current number chart that's on the walls in mathematics classes in our elementary schools, 1 to 100. When we put the rest of this chart together and teach children how to count synergetically by way of, now add these numbers together, children, you get the triangular numbers. Add the triangular numbers together and you get the tetrahedral numbers. Fractionate the tetrahedral numbers every second, third, fourth, and sixth frequencies, and you get the octahedron, the vector equilibrium, the cube, the truncated tetrahedron, and the tetrachedecahedron. Then it's easy to teach them a little bit more about physics and number patterns when you start teaching them in high school about how the numbers associated with the isotropic vector matrix when they're at these different measure markers like the 137 minus 1 or plus 1 gives us the numbers associated with nuclear physics. Then when they get into their advanced classes in college, the mathematics and the structure of their learning will have a comprehensive mathematical and geometrical relationship basis by which they can understand more coherently all of these concepts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's really incredible. Um, that last point on the numbered line and also having a mnemonic and a pedagogical and a rhetorical path that connects up as rows all these other discrete integer valued patterns and their ratios. And it's like all those sequences have meaning and end up being anchoring and scaffolding for all of the accounting of nature as it is, not the measurement 3D.
Yeah, centimeters, grams, and seconds. Yeah, it's really kind of cool. And then, the other two charts should be probably on the walls too at higher mathematics so they can see that prime numbers are used in a patterned way within the development of the polyhedral's continuing, expanding, and contracting structure. So that's all very, very rational. We live in a very rational world. We just have an irrational metric, which makes it difficult for the layman to understand all these different higher fields of physics. Bucky said that he had united the humanities with the sciences and thereby gave a modelable form by which we could teach all humanity how all these different things in physics work. Like, for instance, I think any high school student can understand what I'm talking about when I show the picture where the square route taken continues to double in frequency when we take that shorter zigzagging route, thereby doubling the frequency, having the wavelength, and creating more force or angular momentum within the system. Because scientists haven't learned this, they don't know how to teach this way, and they're stuck using old phraseologies based on old concepts, which are belief systems. And that is why they say things like gravity is created by mass, by creating a warp in the space-time continuum. You see, these words don't make sense to anybody except the most elevated people who've been studying these words and the math behind it. But since the math behind it's incorrect and the time is not speeding up or slowing down, only the frequency of the spin of the individually charged parts, which are creating the increased seeming time because they're spitting out photons or gamma rays faster. This is where the whole misconsideration comes. Now, it's Andre's work which was able to rectify all of this, his unifying all classical force equations and his demystifying the Lorentz force equation are phenomenal works. They'll go down in history. He will get a Nobel Prize for what he has done. I'm certain that, if he lives another 10 years, he might be able to see it. And I'm sure there's a Nobel Prize for all this stuff, where you've unified all the pre-existing constants in synergetics, but that's not what I'm after. I'm just trying to teach people because it's kind of easy for me to understand, only because it's my stuff. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'm pretty much.
Let me just try one more angle on this, just to try to connect it.
Everything's great.
Nature's accounting system is pre-size, pre-time. Those are the two cooperative factors that take something from generality or abstraction to the minute particulars. The real materialized particulars have to do with angle and frequency. And so, what is this unified field and mapping with the generalities and specifics? That's the sort of unified field. I don't know exactly all the research, but one of the philosophical frames that physics is bifurcated on is sort of reductionism and holism. So by searching for a unified field that relates simply the measurements around atomic particles, that is like epicycles. It's going to keep on explaining empirical data tighter and tighter with more and more sophisticated models because it's looking for unification at one scale, whereas with this pre-time, pre-size unified field, which is the isotropic vector matrix, there's a whole integer accounting that ends up actually connecting a lot of empirical dots across systems and scales because the unified field is something that's precise pre-time, but then gets manifest with specific values.
Correct. And so what we find then with the system of synergetics and its continuation, which I've been working on, is that we're able to unite basically anything that is true. I haven't done it all yet. No, there's just so much, Think about there's two people that kind of did this. Bucky did synergetics, and then I did what I've done. And think about if thousands of people were studying this and putting all their neat minds into it, relating all the different constants, all different functions of these different sets of number patterns, which once again are isotropic, always and everywhere the same, and are a modelable relation to the zero energy, no movement state. I think there's a lot of potential, you know what I mean? If just one fellow like me can put this many number patterns together and unite classical Newtonian with quantum mechanics and relativity theory. And I can show how, for instance, the electromagnetic force is the gravitational force and it is the strong nuclear force, uniting them in a comprehensive system of mathematical considerations. It can't be too much longer because laymen like you and others who study this are going to become more comprehensively aware and understanding of it. And you can't hide the truth from people forever. You know what I mean? And it doesn't mean that what I'm saying is the absolute truth and that I'm not making mistakes, but it just means that it's a sensible system. And if people can just study and understand it, then we can find out where the mistakes may lay and we can agree to disagree, or we can disagree and we can, do arguments about it or whatnot. There's no worries, but it's a neat system. And I think there's a lot of potential to it. So just real quick then, when Einstein was talking about unifying the forces, he only had two forces. He was trying to unify electromagnetism and gravity. So he's trying to link Maxwell's equations with Newtonian mechanic equations. So that's exactly what Andre did in his From Relativistic to Classical Mechanics via Maxwell, that paper. He links relativistic equations using Maxwell's equations to the classical mechanics of Newton. And this is exactly what Arthur Young told me I needed to do. He told me, if you want to find the unified field, a good place to start would be in synergetics. He also told me, though, I was going to need to study all that math. You're going to need to understand Maxwell's equations, and you're going to need to understand relativity theory equations. Now, before I ever studied any of that stuff, just when I finished some of my thesis in 2022 here, I came across McCod's work. And lo and behold, Andre McCod did everything that Arthur Young told me that I needed to do in order to accomplish unifying the forces and the masses which are interoperatively associating within the nucleus of the atom. Done.
Amazing. It's making me think again of the figure skaters. So they're drawing in as centers of gravity of their own, and they're also being able to draw together more as a cluster. There's more and more photons being emitted through this doubling of
spin frequency.
Spin. And then there's a convergence. In a real practical setting, you may not be able to get that absolute zero, but there's an asymptotic relationship. What would happen, and that's sort of things becoming more massive, perhaps like a black hole, and things being more diffusive and less effective of each other and seeming to emit slower, interact slower, spin slower.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Now, let me open something up here. Since we're doing it, let's just do it here. This will help us to understand. I think I do have it here. Okay. Let me do two things here. I want to mention Jeff Yee's work from energy wave theory. Okay. Go here. He has this classical constant. Remember Andre's equation from above? Gravity is equal 4 pi squared. That 2 is not supposed to be there, I don't think. Well, anyways, that's a misprint. So, no, that's right. So gravity is equal to 4 pi squared times the radius to the third power divided by the mass multiplied by time to the second power. Now, notice how this formula from Mr. Yee, so here we have a third confirmation, and also think about this. I write that Planck's constant sets the gravitational constant. So in Mr. Yee's work, when you use the length Planck, the Planck length to the third power divided by the Planck mass multiplied by the Planck time to the second power, you get this number here, 667,424. Now compare that to synergetics 667,427 and academia 667,430. You'll notice then that we see how Jeff Yee's work offers a second mathematical proof that Planck's constant sets the gravitational constant G. And all these coincidences are universe's way of saying, hey, Earthians, wake up. So here, let me go to where I was going to go, though. So I just showed you then in Andre's paper that square box from synergetics and how if we more angular momentum creates more mass. So here's another one. So that was on page 17 to 20 on my analysis of Andre McCaw's work. I explained what Bucky was talking about in synergetics, where he states mass or density is a statement of relative event frequency per volume. So the mass increases as the frequency increases. So in this relationship of McCaw's, I explained the relationship between linear momentum and angular momentum and how these relate to the way electromagnetic frequencies increase their energy when they decrease their wavelengths. So I use real-world geometrical models and mechanical associations to try and help offer others to understand. So as another example, when we think about the statement in 525.11, mass is a statement of relative event frequency per volume. In regards to atomic structure, we may relate this to Avogadro's law of gases, which states that under identical conditions of temperature and pressure, all gases contain the same number of molecules per given volume of space. The masses of molecular structures increase, so their density increases, as they accumulate more protons and neutrons, but they don't necessarily take up more space. In this statement of Bucky's, I associate the word mass with density. As an example, we know that with electrolytic conversion, we can separate the oxygen and hydrogen gases from the liquid H2O water. And when we do so, we obtain exactly twice the amount of hydrogen gas in one test tube beaker compared to the oxygen in the other beaker. This process illustrates a proof of Avogadro's theorem. There are twice as many hydrogen atoms in water compared to the number of oxygen atoms, and they take up twice the space when separated into their individual gaseous states within these individual beakers. Even though these different gas molecules take up the same amount of space, one is much more massive than the other. The hydrogen atom has an atomic mass unit weight of 1. It has 1 proton in it. Oxygen has an atomic mass unit of 16. It has 8 protons and 8 neutrons. And so we remember that atoms are not things, they are energy events occurring in pure principle from Synergetics 79204. And this helps us to understand how mass and density are related to how frequently the internally structured energy events are occurring within a specific volume of space. It also helps us to understand how and why gases with different masses can take up the same amount of volume or space. The energy events are more densely compacted in the more massive oxygen atom. All right, herein ends the presentation. And we can kind of sum up and close it. But yeah, I think that you should record that, put it on your YouTube video, and send me a copy if you want. I'll put it on mine.
Okay, so we'll have any last comments, then I will upload it to my YouTube channel and send you the recording.
When you do that, will you please just go ahead and put my email address and let people know that I'm available if they want to, some of my lectures, I send them for free, 700 pages of stuff, yada, yada. I'll send it to you.
I mean, I'd also like to, any links that you want to have in the video description, but more broadly, having like a bibliography, making some of it more accessible and indexable, I think would go a long way too.
I'll work on that. I always like people's suggestions because I never know what might help people. You know what I mean? I'm just off in my own little world thinking. So we should think along those. And on that note, then, yeah, if you want, the only things I would want on your YouTube channel associated with this video is just my YouTube channel. It's in there somewhere. Just grab the link to it. And then my email address. And just say I'm available if they want to talk to me, yada, yada.
Okay. Do you have any last comments or questions or?
No, I think that's cool. I think wherever I said this in this lecture is kind of cool, but you can put it all the way up to here. I don't care. We didn't do nothing too embarrassing or weird.
All right.
It was really good hanging out with you, Dan. I'd always hoped to maybe teach synergetics a little bit more, all this different stuff, but also the basics. So, if this was fun for you and you want to hook up once in a while, I'm available on Mondays. I'm not thinking we need to do it every Monday, but if you want to do it, we'll get together with an email and figure out another time. Would you like to get together again and talk about other stuff? I mean, same stuff, but different aspects of it?
Thank you. I'll email when I've finished everything today, and we'll go from there.
Yeah, sure. Like I say, no rush. Maybe next month or maybe never. I don't care. I'm pretty easy with all this stuff. So I'm at your disposal, friend.
Same. Thank you, Noel. Peace. Bye.
Take care. Bye.